And we are live. What's up, SDS Nation? Welcome to the podcast that brings you the best guests in all of true crime. And you might notice something a little different about this evening. Carm is back in person. It's been a while, Carm. How are you feeling? What's it like to be back?
I'll do the abridged story, okay? Because I could speak for the whole entire hour of what's going on. But I missed all of you guys live. I don't enjoy being a carton copy so much.
Carm, you said you were going to spit the Ricola out prior to
chewing the
Carm's got a little cough, so she's chewing on Ricola.
I'm a human mess the last 4 months.
And now she's back, just partially a human mess. But we're excited to get this show cracking. One more thing. Now Carm will yell at me. She said, don't dare bring it up again. But on the podcast on Friday, we had an impromptu conversation about Tyree Nichols, the man who was killed and now murdered in Memphis by police back on January 7th. I was watching that, decided to ask our law enforcement guests about it. This was prior to the video coming out. I have now watched all 4 videos multiple times. Want to say that what we watched was absolutely abhorrent. Zero excuse by the police officers for this. What they did is absolutely reprehensible, and now they will face the justice system. With that said, we dive back into how we started in true crime, and that is the Dan Markel murder case. What is the latest with the proffer? This has been lingering for quite some time. And we've got one face who is familiar to the show who we'll get to in just a moment. But our best guests are here to break it down. The man who is new, who's not related, as far as I know, to Of Mice and Men's John Steinbeck, is Carl Steinbeck. He is a lieutenant colonel retired, a nearly 30-year judge advocate for the U.S. Army, Judge Advocate General Corps and combat veteran. Now he zealously represents military service members and Department of Civilian employees across the globe in fighting for justice matters. The Steinbeck Law Firm is honored to represent trial advocacy matters for those highly valued individuals that serve in our nation's defense. Thank you to all those who serve. And as someone with a lifelong passion for justice, Carl tonight is going to explain why there are at least 19 reasons that Wendi Adelson should and could be indicted. The familiar face in front of the show is R. Timothy Jansen, a partner in the firm Jansen and Davis. He's handled complex civil, administrative, and criminal litigation. If you're in trouble, you want him on your side. He also spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor, so he knows both sides of that arena. Quick housekeeping notes. Please follow us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. On Twitter, we're at Podcast STS. You can support my dear mom at Patreon.
I told you.
She doesn't like me pushing that. You can also get a subscription on YouTube. She's humble.
Next time he will ask me to hold the cup.
As my beautiful 8-year-old daughter says, please subscribe and please hit that like button. It gets the algorithm chugging. Now, I want to start with this, Tim, to you first. I pulled something from the Tallahassee Democrat, and it was dated November 23rd, 2022. Today is Sunday, January 29th, 2023. Again, from November 23rd, 2022, it reads, Catherine Magbanua, who court records now refer to as a state witness, is meeting with prosecutors this week as they prepare for the trial of co-defendant and former boyfriend Charlie Adelson. She is scheduled to answer questions behind closed doors at the state attorney's office in what's called a proffer. That proffer was supposed to happen behind those closed doors between November 28th and 30th. It's literally 2 months, almost to the day, if not the day, after that. Tim, you are a very well-known, very well-respected defense attorney, and you practice in Tallahassee. What do you think is going on? Why have we not heard a peep?
Well, first of all, she's not a state's witness yet. She's a potential state witness. Like any other witness, they can interview them and determine their credibility, see if they have anything that's relevant. She's a little different than most witnesses because she was a defendant. She went to 2 trials. She committed perjury in at least 2 trials. So, and she's got a life sentence. Her credibility is about 1 on a scale of 10. It's quiet because probably nothing much has come from the proffer. Or what they're trying to do is get independent corroboration, some evidence that could corroborate what she says, determine if they can use that evidence without her. And then if they can't use it without her, is it worth taking the chance of really alienating the whole community, the family, by giving her less than a life sentence to call her as a witness? So they're making those decisions. They're not probably going to be made until March. And then until you see something with the first DCA asking them to relinquish jurisdiction, to give it back to the trial court for the state attorney to file some paperwork to possibly reduce her sentence, I don't think we're going to know much. From what I'm hearing, not giving them much.
And then, Carl, to you, thanks again for being a first timer on the show. LJ writes, the proffer has to cover all the pre-planning from well before Dan's murder, during the murder, after the murder, up to and including secret communications with Charlie and others since. Do you agree with LJ?
I would say yes, she has to cover full disclosure. I don't know how much they brought into the planning aspect, Katie. And if you stop to think about Wendi being down in Miami visiting her parents for 2 weeks, the week before the murder happened, that would have been plenty of time to prepare. Whether Katie was brought in on that and whether this happened up at the Adelson high rise, we don't know yet, but that's maybe some of the things she could be talking about. I'd be surprised if they had brought her into that, but you never know with Charlie thinking maybe he's got her locked in and permanently sealed as somebody that's never going to flip on them. So it remains to be seen. The other reason she could possibly be staying longer is perhaps they're going to use her for an indictment. So that remains to be seen as well. So if she does give good information, I guess, Tim, you have better information on that being in Tallahassee there. So if it's not really panning out, then they won't use her for an indictment. But I do not think they need to use her at all to go after Charlie. I think they have enough in and of itself with Charlie, especially the Dolce Vita evidence that they'll bring in.
And Carl, you sound like my friend John Singer, who is a friend of the show as well. He's an attorney out in New York who came on here. And from the get-go, John said the proffer with Katie Magbanua was going to be a nothing burger. People were annoyed at him, even went so far as to say he wore a hairpiece, if you can believe that.
The ultimate insult.
The ultimate insult. John would have been here tonight if it wasn't for the NFC and AFC playoffs. So you know where his priorities are. You can direct your email hatred
Is the proffer
to
sealed?
Johnson. So that is a great question. We're going to get to that in 1 second, Carm. David Gagamella, if I'm probably butchering it, writes, there is little evidence pointing to Wendi. Donna, on the other hand, is not so lucky. David, tonight is your lucky night because you got Carl Steinbeck here, and he says, I will say it for him. You're wrong. So stick around, and he'll explain why. And then, Carm, to your question just now, it's Sunday night. We're going to have fun tonight. This is our good friend Judy from Asian American Legal Focus. I'd like to hear, especially from Tim, whether he thinks Judge Wheeler will grant Rashbaum's motion to keep the proffer sealed. That was Carmela's question. Tim, care to take a stab at it?
Well, I know Judge Wheeler very well. He was in my fraternity in college. He was actually my little brother in my fraternity at college. So I know Judge Wheeler real well. I know all the players in this thing. It behooves everyone to keep it sealed. There's no reason to unseal it. He wants to try to get a jury. Both parties want to try to get a jury. You don't need it tried in the press. Whatever's leaked out is going to be hashed. And I think the prosecution probably doesn't want it to come out either. Now, remember, they don't have to give him anything unless it's exculpatory if they don't plan on calling her as a witness. The feds do this all the time. They'll put their case agent in the grand jury knowing they're never going to call the case agent. So you rarely get grand jury testimony. So a proffer is a little different, but I think the judge is probably going to try to keep it as clean a trial as I know he will. He's going to keep it on pace. He's not going to take any chances with the high profile case. So I would think he'd probably keep it sealed until he had to keep it open. Because remember, the state doesn't have to determine he's going to be our witness until they call him.
I'm looking at these comments. Bonnie Mack writes, "Oh my OMG, Carm is here. Hi, Carm." People are excited. This person, SL, I don't think Wendi was involved in the plot. Carl, we don't have to get into all 19 right now, and I have some other questions, but tell SL why you do think Wendi was involved with the plot, and then we'll start to break down your 19 reasons as to why as we move forward through the show. But why is SL wrong?
Well, if you just take it from the standpoint that the family ordered the hit, right? Most likely the person to do this is Donna. She was at the point of facing litigation. She was having the accusation that she was bad-mouthing Dan to the kids, calling them stupid and whatnot. So she was facing the motion to have the visitation be supervised. So that was significantly inciting her. And then we also have the issue of Wendi was facing a humongous nuclear bomb coming her way that has not been filed yet. But Dan had said that she had withheld $500,000 from disclosure to the court in the divorce negotiations. And with that motion forthcoming, they were going to do a motion to hold her in contempt of court, subjecting her to criminal sanctions and fines and whatnot. And she possibly could have her job on the line as well. And so with those things both operating against Wendi and Donna, I think it came with Dan continually ratcheting up the litigation and calling them out on stuff they were doing inappropriate. I think that's sort of the straw that broke the camel's back. And they decided at that point, we got to eliminate them. That's the only way we can come out of this unscathed. And look how much of a windfall they got. I mean, they basically hit the lottery on every single point of contention, whether it's moving to Florida, getting all this money, coming across all this money. She's even getting almost $5,000 a month for the 2 kids from Social Security. I mean, even her own brother, Charlie, said she's in a trust fund mentality now and never had to earn any of this. So, and then she also was not having to pay lawyer fees anymore, doesn't have to share visitation anymore. It's all sole custody. So there's multiple reasons of benefit to her where she had motive to take part in it. And then if you also look at it from the standpoint of what are the odds a family would not include her or let her know about it, right? So do you really think the Adelsons would do a hit on their grandchildren's father without the mother blessing off on it? So that's the real issues. Do we have evidence to show that Wendi signed off on this hit and actively took part in it? And that's what I've found evidence in digging through this. And I'm not even digging through it yet, but I got 19 so far written down here, and it's going to go over 50. So those are things I'm looking at from a prosecutor standpoint. And one of the things I should say is that what I look at as a prosecutor is the mannerisms and behavior of folks that are accused or suspected before, during the day of the crime, as well as after. And all these things line up with Wendi to indicate guilt. And I can get into that later.
And just what you said, I mean, you're an attorney, and I've said it on the show before. Every time an attorney talks, I sort of believe what they say, which I guess is contrary to what many others say. But the way you just put it, it just hit me like, like my alarm going off in the morning. There is no way. I don't think they would ever have put this hit out on him without permission from mom, right? So that really just struck me. I never it's so obvious, but I never heard it in those terms. Maui Swift, who is a big friend of the show up in Canada, I should say. Tim, why is she still, we're talking about Magbanua now, why is she still in Leon County Jail?
Well, that's for the convenience for everyone. When I had the Winchester case, when my client turned state witness, he was in state prison. They moved him to McCullough Correctional Institute. It was a better facility, easier for them to get. It was a 30-minute drive. You could get there, you can talk to them, you can verify what's happening. And maybe not in their case, but my client lived here, so family could visit. It was better, more convenient. All the benefits you get. They're probably having them here because they can get to the witness easily to talk, have agents go back out, follow through, ask more questions. They probably gave her blanket ability to talk to her without the lawyers present if they need to go back and ask questions. So it makes it more convenient. You don't have to try to get her brought here with a writ and she's already here, especially if, like you said, if you're going to put her in the grand jury, it's convenient to have her here and prep her before a grand jury.
But what if they decide not to use her at all? Her proffer is finished.
Well, if I was Georgia, I'd keep her there all the way through the trial, put her on the witness list, make the defense think that she's being called, have them waste time and money on preparing for her, and then never call her. And then rest my case and then look at the defense lawyer. State rest.
How much would that annoy Rashbaum?
Furious.
It's wasted money. Someone just is asking too, Tim, and you would know this. Does this mean that Charlie and Katie right now, they're in the same jail, right? The Leon County Jail?
That's correct. They're separated. Women, females are separated.
Right. Okay. Catherine Drew, Carl, this one's for you. Wendi is more than involved. She was in charge in all caps. So, Carl, it's your call. You want to go through, I guess, what would be point one on why you may have already run through that, but wherever you want to pick up and kind of give us an idea of what number you're on,
right?
Why you think Wendi will eventually be indicted. And by the way, you think that there's more evidence to, if I heard this correctly, you believe there's more evidence to indict Wendi than even Donna. Is that correct?
Right.
Wow. How come?
Well, I think there's motive for both, but I think if you look at the emails from Donna, she was so revved up and scorched earth. I mean, she's willing to have the kids be converted to Catholicism before the hearing coming up. I mean, this thing is really bizarre and sick. To abuse and manipulate these kids as tools like that, as tools of warfare in a court litigation. And then she has, in addition to that, for Wendi, like I said before, had all this to gain as well. And she was facing potentially loss of career, license, reputation, whatnot. Something had to be done. And Charlie had the means to do this. I think Donna, the way she was so angry about this and bossing Wendi around, I think Wendi was like totally in agreement once she realized, I got to save face. This is going to answer all my desires to just eliminate dealing with Dan here and after. And it worked. I mean, look at how they left within days. How do you possibly plan a funeral, grieve, and move a household all within a matter of like 72 hours? I mean, you're telling me there was no planning involved ahead of time and Wendi wasn't part of it? That's just to me preposterous.
I have a feeling that Georgia Kappelman is going to watch this and take some notes from Carl Steinbeck here. Tim, a question that keeps coming up, and I wonder it myself, what is the definition of a co-conspirator? Because now I think we have Charlie, Donna, and Wendi labeled as such, but even to this day, I think that Charlie and Donna are speaking on the phone, he's calling from jail quite frequently. So what does it mean really to be a co-conspirator?
Well, co-conspirator, evidentiary wise, it's very important. Right now, they're unindicted co-conspirators. They're not charged. Well, some of them are. Charlie is. But Wendi may be an unindicted co-conspirator. The mother is an unindicted co-conspirator. And in federal courts, you can get certain statements in that would be hearsay that can get it in by a co-conspirator statement that was made in furtherance of the conspiracy. So a lot of times in federal court, prosecutors use conspiracy because all you got to prove is that two people agreed to commit a crime and took an act towards completion of that crime. It's clients never understand. They'll say, hey, I don't have any drugs. They don't have any drugs on me. They don't need drugs on you. They got you on a wire talking about a delivery. They got you agreeing to pay this amount of money. They're charging you with conspiracy. And you try to explain, you don't need to get caught with the drugs in your hand. Conspiracy means you just two agreed and you took an act towards that agreement. And then the government would have to prove that. I agree wholeheartedly that they had motives. Wendi certainly had motive. Her mother had motive. But the question in George's mind is going to be, do I have enough to indict Why should I indict? Why should I rush it? Now that I got Magbanua talking, now I got this trial coming up. Let's see what I can get, make it a little cleaner, have the state attorney sign off on it, and maybe we don't want to. Maybe we can find something to go after the mother and maybe Harvey. So that's probably why she's not rushing it. There's no time limit.
Carl, do you agree with what Tim is saying? I mean, when, in your opinion, do you think that Wendi would be next ahead of Donna?
I would expect them to both be indicted, and possibly Harvey as well, because it's has much more judicial economy. They're going to have trouble pointing the finger at another person, sort of like they did in the first trials. They're always pointing the finger at somebody else. That's going to make it a lot harder to do that. And so I just think that it's all a prosecutor's preference on how soon you charge and your strategies and tactics for when you charge, when you indict. And so I do think it's coming up sooner than later. I would imagine that they may indict both of them later this year, but I don't have the inside knowledge of that, obviously. I just think that the way this thing is moving, my estimation is they're going to indict one or both here later this year.
Is it possible that they could indict him on the same day or within a matter of days, potentially? Is that possible?
Who are you asking that to, Carl?
I'll ask you, Tim.
They could, but if you're going to prepare an indictment, you're going to type it up. You're going to have them both included. You wouldn't do one and then do another because you got the grand jury. You got to get approval by your boss. You got to get witnesses there. You might as well do them at the same time if you have enough, because then you got to do a press conference. You got to do a press release. You wouldn't want to be doing that like 2 or 3 times within weeks or months.
And then, Tim, right back to you with Roxanne A. I'm just wondering if Ruth, and that's Ruth Markel, Dan's mother, can push this. It may not be up to her, but ... I assume she's talking about the proffer with Magbanua here. I know, I think it's Marcy's law requires prosecutors to inform the family, but it is up to George at the end of the day, right? But she would probably listen to Ruth. Is that right?
That's 100%. Marcy law requires that the victim have involvement, know about plea offers. They don't override the state. State makes the final decision. Now, in charging decisions and the way they've dealt with Ruth, who become pretty close with the prosecutors, I believe, of course, they're going to have input. They would probably sign off, and they would probably let the family know ahead of time what was coming, so they wouldn't be shocked to see something. But it ultimately is the elected state attorney, Jack Campbell, and it's going to be Georgia who's going to be advising Jack. We have enough, and Jack and the prosecutors and the investigators are going to have to feel comfortable. We have enough to go forward. And Jack is not one to go away from a fight. So the elected state attorney he's not a woke prosecutor. If he has the evidence, they'll go forward.
Another comment from Kathy P. in Arizona. Carm, you must feel great about this. I never get these comments, Carm. Not that I'm upset at all, but Kathy writes, "Hello, STS Nation, and lovely Carm is here. Hooray, Carm! You're wanted and loved, Carm."
I have to clarify one thing.
Yes.
The reason I disappeared is that Joel's father, my husband of 61 years, got deathly ill, and he's still very, very sick. He never recovered. It was August 7th, and that's why I disappeared. And of course, I enjoyed this tremendously, and I was deprived of this. So I got really bad experience lately.
Prayers up for my dad. So moving along here, Carl, right back to you from Gitti Dalgard. I believe Wendi was involved. Continue on, Carl, about another reason for why Wendi will be indicted, in your opinion.
Well, number one, if you look at the TV and the schedule for the repair, I think that directly implicates Wendi as far as the timing. If you keep in mind that the hitmen drove up there the first time, were unsuccessful. They couldn't really find Dan and a good time to hit him. So they needed more precise information from up north. And it looks like Wendi would have been the only one source to provide that. And if you look at the fact that this TV that was bought instead of a hitman, we've heard that so many times, right? So that's scheduled for repair apparently within the 10 o'clock to noon window. and the murder happens directly in the middle of there around 11 o'clock, is that really a coincidence, or is that planning a murder and showing consciousness of guilt? So if you also look at the TV, is another proof that TV is code, is the fact that when they did the bump, that was brought up between Donna and Charlie. Donna's the one that brought it up. She mentioned TV and like 5K or something to that effect. So that proved right there that that's how they were going to talk in code. And if they did have to go on the phone or whatnot through apps and whatnot, that this is the method of communication they're going to use to divert anybody bringing attention to what they're talking about.
Carl, I'm just wondering, obviously you have a breadth of experience, 30 plus years, I think. I mean, how confident are you if they gave you this case tomorrow that you could prosecute and get a conviction against Wendi?
I feel confident that there's enough things here. There's enough indicators that show she was involved in the planning that that she should be easily being able to be convicted by a jury. I don't think there'd be any doubt whatsoever. And a lot of people think, well, there's not enough evidence of that, and she was innocent in this whole thing. But you got to keep in mind also, she's a lawyer, so she tried to also take part in the planning of this to make it look like she wasn't involved, right? So they're not going to make it where she's so much involved that that she's going to go down with them in the event that the long arm of the law is going to go down there to Miami. But if you look at what her actions did beforehand, it shows to me it shows clear planning, and that she was involved with this totally. And I believe I could totally convince a jury that she was in on it.
How about this comment? BuzzFeed is a fan of the show, and we appreciate it. Dan knew enough of their family secrets to be dangerous beyond nuisance. You think of, Dan getting caught, obviously, figuratively and literally in the crosshairs. But do you agree with this comment here, Carl?
Well, I don't know how much he knew about the Markel situation. I mean, on one hand, when he went nuclear, and I think he talked about going nuclear with the because he was apparently asking about some heirloom on his side of the family as well that Wendi didn't turn over. So I didn't think he realized what these people were capable of doing, right? So if he would have realized that, he would have not gone as far as he did. He was just doing normal things that you do to fight an opponent. Like the chance of winning a motion within less than a year after your divorce is finalized, states are not going to allow that to be reopened and relitigated because someone decides to move some different locations. Courts don't like to give up the jurisdiction. So for her to say, I have a new job opportunity and the kids will be better down in Florida, the states are going to have it where you have to have something that could not have been contemplated at the time the divorce decree is signed off on, right? So what new was there that could not have been anticipated? There's nothing new that would apply to. In fact, that's why the judge shut down Wendi after she testified in the first hearing of the case, where she said, look, you haven't shown me anything that justifies reopening this case. So if you want to still present stuff, you're just wasting the court's time. So pretty much they were shot out of the water right out the gate. So that also shows that, and then Dan started, doing the digging. They sort of fired the first shot, and then Dan started doing the digging. So Dan just didn't realize what kind of people he's up against, right? So yeah, he did probably know a lot of the, family secrets. He probably knew a lot of the same stuff that, Jeff Lacoste knew about, like the seedy criminal background of Charlie as well. So he just never, Charlie wasn't in play at that point, so he would never use that in court.
I'm actually wondering right now how many people just tuning in just thought you were actually a cardboard cutout and you started to speak. But go on, Carl.
Well, because you are a magician. But I think that the way Dan reacted, obviously it was to keep his children in Tallahassee and not 8 hours away. Allegedly, he was a very good father, but he fought like a true, no offense, the two attorneys who are sitting there, but he fought like an attorney with all the knowledge and all the power that he had. And he was a very, very intelligent person, but he fought really hard. And it became like a real legal fight between them to death almost. No pun intended.
Right.
Good point, Carm.
Thanks, Daddy.
Yeah, Tim, Polka Dots writes, someone behind the plot obviously knew Dan's schedule, and the only Adelson who had that information was Wendi. And we know Wendi drove by the crime scene the day of. So what do you make of this comment? And is that part of what Carl should have on his list of, evidentiary information that could potentially help indict Wendi Adelson?
Well, Carl's going to obviously do a circumstantial evidence case, start with motive, opportunity, knowledge, plan, behavior during, behavior before. And it's clearly there was motive. Her whole thing about going and get the liquor, the route she went, that makes no sense. Where she went way out of her way to get to the liquor store. She went right by that street, so she'd go by Trescott. You would not take that route if you were going to take that route. Benton Road would have been a straight route. I found troubling with Wendi was this boyfriend, the new boyfriend, where they were trying to, his schedule to, it sounded like they were going to try to set him up for the fall and make him look like he was the jealous boyfriend. Thank heavens the poor guy flew out earlier before their plot worked, because and he looked like Dan. I mean, how ironic is that? He looks just like Dan if you didn't know any better. Even he found it scary. But remember now, Wendy's got a very good lawyer, John Laurel. He's a very experienced lawyer that I've known for many, many years. He's a good lawyer. Now, you ask, can he take the case and charge it? Sure, he can charge it. A prosecutor can indict a ham sandwich. The question is really, do you have enough at this point that Georgia and Jack feel comfortable to go forward against Wendi? And would you add the mom in there? Because clearly the mom was doing communications with Charlie after the bump, clearly talking in code. If she didn't know anything, she wouldn't be using code words. They were clearly, she knew more than what she was trying to say. I think Wendi, I think the mother clearly is they have enough to indict her. No doubt about it.
I end with the checks that she wrote.
The checks that she wasn't employed, all this nonsense about a non-showing up employee. She couldn't even name one appointment she made, and all that money's going through there. They thought they were smarter than the legal system. And they weren't. And the guy in Idaho is going to find out the same thing. Policing today is much better. Technology is much better. And when you combine the police force, like in this case, Pat Sanford, the FBI agent, he sat there and looked through so much video on buses to find that Prius. And he broke the case by sitting there looking at buses for that Prius. And he found the Prius. And he was able to show that the Prius had damage to the car. To the rear view mirror had damage to it. And that's how they put this thing together. So I agree. They could probably move forward, but I know Georgia, she's methodical. She's going to wait until they have everything. And then she's going to pop up when you least expect it with an indictment.
Tim, what about the financial windfall that Carl speaks of in this $500,000 that I'm really just learning about? How much of a motive is that?
A lot of cases, you're like, okay, what's the motive? Who benefits the most? Any murder case, who benefits? Is there insurance? Who benefits? Who has a motive? Those are the basic things police look at. Wendi wanted her kids moved. Dan was doing everything legally as an attorney. What his problem was, he was too good. He wasn't bullied by these people, didn't realize what they were capable of. And when he turned it on them, like Carl was saying, they felt like they got pushed in a corner, and their best way out was to do something unimaginable that anybody would not do. That divorce is much easier. It's better for the kids, but they felt they could do what they wanted to do, hire these knuckleheads, have it separated by Sigfredo and Magbanua, and it won't come back to us. But law enforcement, records, phones, all that stuff comes back. And these two knuckleheads that shoot the gun off in their car. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
Right.
Just want to give a very due shout out to the great Fancy Fiction. You see her up on the screen. She, Asian American Legal Focus, who has a comment right here, which I didn't even read. She just writes, she's responding to Carl here. And Mentor Lawyer are the three best at this Markel case. You guys got to check out their channels, but you probably already are. If you're not, get on it. Carl, I heard you back to Magbanua for a minute. I was listening to your YouTube podcast that you do with your brother, which is really interesting, by the way. And you talked about how you've never seen an indigent client like Katie Magbanua with two fairly high-priced defense attorneys. Is the implication there that perhaps someone is paying for them, and perhaps those people might be the Adelsons? Possibly.
If they are, that's very troubling, because think about, you have not one lawyer, but two lawyers defending you, and you're indigent, you're making $2,000 a month, and you go to have, million, at least $1 million or more, or 2 million, whatever it was, we don't know, but that kind of money available to not only defend her once, but then twice, that's like unheard of. Most people would go indigent after the first one if you could afford a lawyer. Right. And then on top of that, these lawyers are from the Miami area. So they had to go all the way up to Tallahassee, and to a place they're not used to practicing law, and go in front of judges they're not used to practicing in front of. And then stay overnight at hotels and whatnot, and all the costs involved in that as well, logistically. So it's so bizarre. And then when you stop to think about the fact that Katie had an offer on the table to do no jail time, and she winds up getting life sentence without parole. How does that happen? There's something amiss there, right? And so there's something, why would she roll over? There was something very peculiar and odd where she was being influenced with the wrong ideas, and look where it got her. Okay. So there is something very disturbing about how this all went down.
Okay, let's look at the other side. Suppose it's not the Adelsons. Then who is it?
Who would have? Well, that's a good point, Carmela. Who has a motive to make sure she gets acquitted more than the Adelsons? There's nobody, right?
I don't know.
I mean, don't know if they did it, but it looks very suspicious.
Tim, Carm sounded like she was an attorney right there. She was asking a question with no.
I pick up. I'm like a monkey imitating.
Tim, what did you make of that question? There's really no answer. You guys were both stunned. Carm stunned you both. You were silent.
Well, it's interesting because Georgia and the state filed the motions for a nebia in front of Judge Hankinson, who's a former federal prosecutor with me, and a judge, very hard, conservative judge, and he found there was a valid attorney-client payment, that it was not being, there was no conflict. I don't know what it was, if it was a relative, but somehow they did afford a very expensive lawyers coming from South Florida, one trial, maybe two. Some of that you can understand the first trial because of notoriety. The lawyers might take a little less money to get the exposure. But when you have a client that's offered immunity, full immunity, or at least no jail time, and they turn it down, the investigators knew something was up. They thought maybe that they were bought off. Then they came to the realization that they thought that their children's lives were at stake. And that's why Katie took it the way she did. Maybe in this proffer, they'll find that out, which could be good evidence if she says the reason I didn't take this immunity was because they threatened my child, or they're going to put my kid in college, both of my kids. I could have never afforded that. Those are things a proffer could be helpful.
Tim, give us a peek behind the curtain. I mean, she's sitting in the Leon County Jail right now, Katie Magbanua. What is going on, if anything, between her and Kappelman? I mean, if Georgia has a question, does she just drive over to the Leon County Jail and say, I'm coming here? Or they bring her over there? Or, I mean, are they in contact frequently, do you think? Are they talking at all? Are they not, what, just pull the curtain back and tell us what could be happening between them.
Well, it's not that easy to bring them from the jail to the courthouse if there's not a scheduled court event. So what happens is they normally would go over there. Now, they're careful about going over there because they don't want to be seen with this girl talking, because then word gets out she's a snitch or whatever. But that's how it would probably work. An investigator would go, the lead now, Isom, he retired. So FBI agent Sanford, he's still on the case. She would probably have them doing the follow-ups, coming to her, and then she would probably have questions or answers. I want this. And then they would go back to her. This is the process I had when I had Winchester. They would come back to me, and then we would meet again. I remember we went to where the body was buried, and we all went. The prosecutors went. Everybody went. And so that's how it works. They like them local, so Georgia can have a quick question, quick answer. The Leon County Jail is not great. Nobody wants to be there. It's not luxury. It's not a camp like at some of these federal institutions. It's not great.
Not a place I would want to be or, do well at. And that reminds me, Carl, we actually, before I get to Fancy's comment here, we had some ex-cons on the podcast to get their take.
I saw
and
that.
they basically said that, they basically think that Charlie could flip. He doesn't have street code. He doesn't come from the, thug life. Do you think there's any chance ahead of this trial that Charlie turns state's evidence?
Boy, that's a great question, Joel. I know my brother thinks he's going to flip, and I'm more of the idea that he's not going to flip because he's in such a dilemma. Because I think he's got a lot of resentment and animosity towards Wendi, and now look at what his life situation is right now, and Wendy's really still living like a trust fund recipient. So I think he would love to flip on Wendi to be able to see the light of day someday. But I think because of he would have to not involve his mom and Harvey. So I think that's where they would not probably find his proffer credible if he said my mom and dad had nothing to do with this. So I think that's probably where the disconnect's going to be. And if you look at the way he sat in the last court hearing, compared to the way he acted before, so cocky and arrogant and know-it-all, and he looked completely dejected, depressed. And I think a lot of the reality is sinking in of what kind of the way he's ruined his own life. Not to mention, his nephew's dad's, and terminating his life. So,
Carl, I want to get back to some of your reasons for and then once you put together your 50 reasons, we'll come do a show, 50 reasons why Wendi could be indicted. But Fancy writes here, and then I'm going to put up another one right afterwards. Again, Fancy, there's probably no one outside of Georgia Kappelman who knows more about the case than Fancy. She writes, Wendi was cleaning out her room at her parents' place the week before she moved in that bedroom. That shows that there was premeditation, right, Carl? And then we go right to Charlie McWhirter, who's a friend of the show. Like Donna and Charlie would hire two gangsters to pop a cap in Dan's ass without knowing where those boys would be, ? No way, Jose. Wendi had to be in on it. That's not a far reach for a jury to convict. So what about this, premeditation and this comment coupled together? Does that show up on your list of 19 reasons Wendi could be indicted?
Yeah, these are some of the things, like I say, on this list of 19, that's my number one, said in a different way. Wendi is the source for the hit because she knows the timing, and they didn't want to waste another time to go up there not knowing what his schedule was. And it played beautifully with the Geek Squad showing up to fix the TV. And then, by the way, that's another red flag right there. You're telling me Wendi and her brother and mom are all in on this thing about getting the TV fixed when it has a cracked screen, and you're going to set up an appointment and go through all the hassles of that with Best Buy, when all you got to do is call them up, say, hey, I got a cracked screen, it's covered under warranty. And of course, they're going to say, no, it's not. And that's the end of the matter right there. But they thought this big thing about the TV and the joke about being bought instead of because it's cheaper than a hitman. It's just really bizarre, bizarre thinking. But that's what they chose to surround this whole day of the murder with. So that comment by Fancy Fiction definitely is one of the points. That's not on my list. We can make that number 20 right here. I'll adopt that. That's a great point. It shows the planning. I don't know where I'd seen that before. I don't know if that was from the emails or something, but I cannot remember if that was a comment or actually in the video somehow of the tapes or conversations they had. But like number 2 was something that Tim hit on. That was very much a very heavy indicator that she was involved in planning. This whole relationship she had with Jeff Lacoste and the way she abruptly ends it, and the way she did it was even so bizarre because if you recall, Jeff said everything was fine that morning. There's some on again, off again stuff. When she went to Miami, she really wouldn't talk to him at all, and that seemed to be like the norm. But then everything sort of like turned back on, and it's back to normal that morning. But by that night, she's like texting him saying, "Don't ever talk to me again." So what happened between morning and afternoon? My theory would be, if I was prosecuting this, is that Wendi got confirmation that the hit is on, be prepared. And she probably told him the window what the schedule was for Dan. And that's when that happened, is Monday afternoon. They said, okay, they're ready to come up there. You say the day and the time and the location. And that's what I think is the most likely scenario, what happened.
And Tim, how is John Lauro going to refute everything that Carl is presenting right now? You're a seasoned veteran defense attorney who I'm calling if I'm in trouble. What's the argument going to be? That there's nothing that actually physically ties her, or what?
Well, I think does Charlie get convicted? Is Charlie convicted? If so, they go, of course they kept her out. They didn't want her to know. They're protecting the little sister. They didn't want her to know, so they purposely kept her away from it so she'd be shielded. And that's why you don't see her knowing much, and anything she did was just happenstance. There's no communication that shows that she knew or participated, but it's not going to be easy. Jurors are pretty smart people. They know, they have common sense. They try to do the right thing, regardless of your arguments in a trial. You can say, and I've had someone come up to me. I went to a doctor's office. Well, my baby was being born, my second one. She goes, "Hey, Mr. Jansen, I was on your jury." I'm like, oh, nice. I said, "Did I do all right?" She goes, "Oh, you were great lawyer, but your client was guilty as hell." So they don't hold it against the lawyers, but they take their job serious. And there is so much motivation and so much motive on Wendi's behalf. Her behavior is not consistent with someone who's completely innocent. Right. It wouldn't be far for Georgia to push that over the line and thinking beyond a reasonable doubt by circumstantial evidence that she did it. But or she's involved.
Tim, you know Georgia. Do you think she wants the big fish, and who is Wendi? Do you think that's her ultimate goal?
They always, if it wasn't for that person, there wouldn't be this person. Like in the Winchester murder case, the wife wanted the money, talked my client into do what he did. If it wasn't for the wife, there wouldn't have been my guy, even though my guy did the horrendous act. So they wanted her. I had another murder case many, many years ago where a young man was talked into killing somebody, and my client cooperated, got a deal. And they said, if it wasn't for the wife convincing that young man to do it, there wouldn't have been a murder. So they always want to go after the person who caused it to happen. And that would be the Adelsons, if they have the evidence, and certainly the motivation. Wendi had more motive than anybody. Mm-hmm. I mean, when he's correct. If she hid assets, $500,000 in assets on legal forms in a court proceeding, she could have been disbarred. She clearly would have lost her job at Florida State. Right. That alone would be sufficient for someone to commit a crime of murder.
Carm, right now on the record, because now when Tim said she was the baby sister they were trying to shield, he said it. It was very convincing. And I said, oh, maybe, and I started to buy into it. But right now, Wendi complicit or not? Did she know what was going on or no? And keep in mind, Fancy's watching this. She's going to freak out if you don't say yes. But give us the answer either way.
I will not say I'm not afraid of Fancy. because I could reason it out with her. But I think that she was the one who initially pushed the buttons. She would work her mother up constantly with stories, feeding her stories through the divorce proceedings and afterwards. She was constantly playing up her role as the victim of this situation. And she was very close to her mother, and she used her mother that way.
I've never used you, Carm. Meg Meyer says, why would they do this without Wendy's approval? Followed right along by SJ. And Carl, this is for you. Wendi avoided speaking to Dan the week of the hit. He left her the time he'd be done at the gym on voicemail, and she gave Isom a different time. She avoided speaking to him, then drove by the scene. This is already on your list, I assume, but how important is this information?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple different matters here that they're indicating, but it all has to do with the timing and how Wendi set up the timing of the breakup with Jeff. I mean, there's like I might have said before, when you're prosecuting a case, you can maybe see a couple coincidences and go, okay, this person we don't want to pursue a prosecution on because there's just a couple coincidences that make them look guilty. But here, there's so many significant ones that just jump out at you and leap off the page that's what just makes this case really strong against Wendi, I think, because you don't want to go after somebody that's innocent, right? As a prosecutor, that's the last thing you want to do. I mean, if you're not about justice, then you shouldn't be a prosecutor. So the question is, you have to believe first, number one, they're guilty. And second of all, then you have to look at the evidence and see, is this a kind of rock solid evidence I can feel comfortable with arguing in front of a jury and explain to a jury, because a lot of this stuff is complex. There's so many different moving parts on this case. You got to really be able to break the complexity of it down in simple terms in order to convict, in order to get a conviction with a jury. So what you do is just walk them through all these little points and really point out the fact that this is more than a coincidence. There's too many things here that indicate this is planning. And if she's planning because she had the greatest motive involved, then she's guilty. So, and it doesn't take a whole lot of aiding and abetting to be guilty as a co-principal under state and federal law. Tim, you'd agree with me on that.
Absolutely. 100%.
I prosecuted a case one time, got a conviction because a sergeant handed another soldier a condom, and the condom was used to rape a passed out soldier. So, I mean, how long did that take? A second? And that's all it took to convict him. So if Wendi did any one of these things that I'm mentioning that indicate planning, then that's enough legally to convict her, I would say.
Yeah, she gave the schedule.
Right.
Where he goes, where
schedule alone is enough to convict.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right.
Just that. That's interesting. Carm.
But okay, all these are still guesses, conjectures, but I have a hard time imagining that with the FBI listening and so forth, that she never slipped afterwards. She never said anything to her mother or to anybody that was incriminating her, that she was so perfectly controlled. It's very hard for me to imagine that she would be so perfectly controlled that she would never slip up.
And that's what the state might say, Carl. How do you how do you defend that? I'm sorry, that's what the defense would say. How would the state defend that?
Like I say, she's a lawyer, but she's not a criminal lawyer, but she's got a lot of academic successes and whatnot. And of course, that's the first thing she even admitted in her podcast, that I was, ex-spouses are the number one target if there's a murder. So if she knows she's the number one target, what is she going to do? Make the planning down there in Miami happen, and then just basically say, okay, we're going radio silent. I'm going to be off the radar completely. Do not talk to me about this case, because as soon as you do, then they're probably going to listen in. So, I think that they weren't that foolish to just basically lay her out to be convicted that easily. So, but like I say, if you look at the pattern of her behavior before, during the day, and after, all of it lines up with what a guilty person would do. Right.
Carl, you're in Texas, I believe. What piqued PIQUED your interest about this case?
Well, I was at my brother's house, and he told me about this case. He was he has a podcast and YouTube channel, Brainwashing Children, and He's addressing all the issues going on with kids having parental alienation. And then this one, I don't think he'd had a case like this before, where it went from like parental alienation, where the one parent tries to poison the well with the kids, make them turn against their other parent, and then they deny visitation, play all these games that are really hurting the kids, and they use the kids as tools of control, and it's actual child abuse, right? Wicked, evil child abuse. So that's what's happened with these kids as well, and that's one of my points as well with this. Is like, how can you deny these kids visitation with the Markells? That is just so cruel, heartless, and depraved to do this kind of stuff for these kids after they've lost their dad. And I can go into other points off that as well.
I heard you say, I think on your brother's podcast, that you're worried for them because if the Adelsons really had their back against the wall, the kids could become targets of some sort. Can you expand on that?
That's a point my brother made. So I can't recall what he was driving at, but a lot of times there's murder suicides for something like this. If all the way Adelsons are going to get locked up, who's not to say, God forbid they do some kind of murder suicide or something. So I don't know if that's what he was talking about. I can't remember, but these kids are not being properly cared for by being denied access to the Markells, and I would bet you that they're not in any kind of psychological counseling, and the irony of it is Wendi, when Issam came to get her there, when she was having lunch right after the murders, she was sitting with two psychologists, and Jeff Lacoste was also a social worker professor that knew a lot about mental, assistance of kids and adults and stuff like that, I'm sure. So did she use these resources to help the kids deal with this horrible trauma news that their dad's dead? No, she just cut off Jeff Lacoste completely. I mean, Jeff was cool. He'd been a cool guy to bring in and say, hey, and he was like a second dad to these kids. So it just goes to show the ruthless, heartless abuse of these kids just to get back at Dan and get your agenda fulfilled.
More love flowing in for Carm. Carm, we love seeing you, from LJ, followed by my prayers to your husband, Carm, from Catherine, followed by Roxanne A. Love you, Carmela, right into Maya. And this, Tim, for you, why wouldn't Katie talk before her trial? I don't get it. Tim, do you get it?
No, that's a good question. I don't know if her lawyers were convincing her that they thought they could get a not guilty. My understanding, her first trial was 11-1 to convict, and one juror refused to even consider deliberating. So, and that word spreads out. Lawyers find out, the state finds out. They kind of know which way that jury's. So what your odds are of winning in another trial. Usually they don't go well for the defendant. State usually cleans up their act. They get more witnesses, more evidence. So 11-1, I wouldn't think you're going to win. Take a good chance. Somebody told her she was threatened. She was paid off. Something had to make her turn down no jail and no conviction.
Well, for one thing, her defense.
The interrupting is back. I feel right at home. Go ahead, Carm.
I cannot help it.
It's
in my nature. What happened is that her defense, her attorney, Tara Kawas, had a little meeting after the end of the second trial, and she said that she always believed in Katie being innocent. And if she kept saying to her, you are innocent, you have nothing to fear, that's what she said, that she firmly believed in the innocence of her client. And if she conveyed this to Katie, then Katie must have felt like nothing is going to happen to me if I tell the truth, and I will be exonerated.
Exonerated, Carm. Yes.
So that's maybe one of the reasons that Katie wouldn't. I used to think maybe the children got money, or she was threatened that something would happen to the children. I don't think that anymore.
Well, the conjecture is that it was, she was being propped up financially. One of my favorite names of late, Gorgeous Junk here. And this, Carl, to you. Donna almost had a nervous breakdown when the guy came up to her during the bump. Carl, what do you think it is like for the Adelsons on a daily basis? I mean, with the diarrhea, the Pepto-Bismol, has it gotten worse over the years? This has been a very slow churn, going back to 2014. What is a day in the life of Donna or Wendi like, realizing that law enforcement could and is likely going to be going after them?
Well, I think the if she had nerves about it during that time, the fact that Charlie got arrested some years later, the news keeps getting worse and worse. Sort of like the litigation between Dan and Wendi, and they kept on getting on the wrong end then, and they're on the losing end now for this. So I think that I think they are probably on some major medication just to be able to keep them through the day and let them sleep at night. I think there's probably a lot of fighting going on. I think Harvey, there's not as much evidence where he was like, getting him probably an encouraging voice for the plan. He was probably more of the reserve, like, well, are you sure you want to do this kind of thing? Because what makes me think of that is, if you remember right after the bump happened, they wanted to keep it away from Harvey till they got it sort of worked out and reassured that this is not something to be terrified about. But but the way he sat in the other video there, I forget the name of it, at that restaurant. So obviously he wasn't mad and didn't say something like, I told you shouldn't have done this thing or whatnot. So he obviously blessed off, and he's probably the most, cynical about the plan. But, Charlie talked his way through this, and everybody believed Charlie. And this is going to come back to, never having law enforcement come to Miami and think they're a suspect. So in any event.
Fancy Fiction writes, STS Nation, that's all of you. Who wants to see Carl Steinbeck debate Stephen Epstein, who wrote Extreme Punishment, the objective facts connoisseur, Fancy's words, not mine, on Wendy's role in the murder for hire? Me too. Carl, would you be down or up to do that? I guess
Sure.
Whichever way you look at it. Would you?
Sure.
Have you read the book?
I'm almost all the way through the book. Yes.
And what do you think so far?
There was a lot of good details in there that I was not aware of from some of the other sources. I've not had time to go through all the other sources. I mean, between you and Fancy and Mentor Lawyer and Judy, the YouTube lawyer, I mean, there's so much. There's a gold mine of information there to gather. I just haven't had a chance to look at all of it. But sure, I'm willing to talk to anybody about this case, because I think it's a case that screams for justice, and it's gone on way too long. And these people, these guilty parties deserve to be behind bars, and these kids need to see their grandparents. I can't say that enough.
I think that Fancy wants them to debate it is because the author of the book felt that Wendi will get away with it.
Yeah. Well, he did more than that. He didn't think that if I understood it correctly, that he didn't really find her culpable in this crime.
No. He's an attorney, culpable enough to be indicted. And Carl I call you Carl because I
Sure.
forgot your last name. Oh,
how can you forget John Steinbeck of Mice and Men?
Right.
That's my brother.
Yeah.
Oh, is it really?
No.
Hey, man.
It could be your grand uncle.
Is your brother's name John?
Yeah, same spelling.
I love it.
No relation.
No relation at all. So this next question from James Wagner. Tim, for you, is there no behavior on the part of Wendi Adelson that could violate the ethical standards set forth by the Florida bar? For example, failing to disclose $500,000, obfuscation, etc. What does it take for the Florida bar to disbar you?
Well, financial disclosure usually is done under oath. So she would have had to do that under oath. She signed a false document, committed perjury. So if she testified in court to that, then she probably did violate ethical rules of Florida bar. Obfuscation, people say that, being a family divorce lawyer is much more dangerous than doing criminal work. You take someone's kids or their dogs and property, much more dangerous. And we find that out in this case. They have a saying about that. They said in criminal cases, you have bad people on their best behavior. In divorce cases, you have good people on their worst behavior. So it got pushed to the brink. And do people fudge on their divorce affidavits and try to downplay their assets almost every day. But $500,000, that's not a mistake.
Angela writes, and Carl, this is for you. Wendi is a lawyer and doesn't get a lawyer for her interview with the police. She wanted to push her narrative and have the police pursue, quote unquote, jealous men killing Dan, Jeffrey Lacoste. I think this is a great point. What do you think?
Yeah, this feeds into some of my points. And one of my points made is that that Wendy's main theme of her interview was trying to be removed as the primary suspect and to steer the homicide investigation to Jeff Lacoste. She says, who would do this? Many times. It sounds very rehearsed, insincere. I question the tears. They seem to be manipulated and forced upon her because there's too many other things, if this was really an upsetting news to her, that she didn't follow up on. I think she had those 2 weeks to rehearse it. She probably got drilled over and over again, how she's going to talk to the police, what to talk about, how to act. All that was rehearsable. But you can't fake genuine sincerity of loss of someone you love, right? And the other disconnect I'd argue about is you go from boo-hooing, acting like this is such trauma to you, and then you up and leave town and never have anything to do with the Markells after that, and don't want to help the police. I mean, it just shows what this whole thing was fabricated. And then she said, another thing I have here is that she's saying her parents didn't like Dan, but they would never talk bad about him to the kids. I mean, she's making a dig there at the Dan's motion of the court that they were bad-mouthing Dan to the kids. And the other thing was that school decision that they talked about that was supposed to happen by Monday. That was just another ruse to make it look like things are just as normal, that she's settling down. The litigation's not as contentious, and that she's planning on staying in town with the kids.
The kids, again, obviously the real collateral damage
Right.
in all this. Dan loses his life. His kids are now living a life that probably no kid should be living. The interesting thing is we're down here in Miami, and the same way Tim is in the same circles with the judge and the prosecutor, we are in somewhat not. We overlap with some people who know Wendi, and I've heard stories about how the kids are already being ostracized at a young age because of what they think and believe their mother and grandparents did to the father. So it's really a sad situation all around. Tim, this one's for you here. Peggy R writes, why with all the phone calls right after the bump or even before did they not tap Donna or Wendy's phones? They only tapped Charlie and Katie's. Good point.
Well, tapping a lawyer's phone is not easy to do. You have to have sufficient probable cause. Usually when you get a wiretap, you have to prove to a judge that there is no other way, no alternative but to tap this phone. When you add in that she's a lawyer, you got attorney-client privilege, makes it very difficult. Charlie and Katie's would clearly be tapped. They had enough sufficient. At that point, they could time together, and I'm sure they were tapping them. The whole investigation was kind of set back because the past state attorney refused to let the investigators go down and talk to Sigfredo, have Georgia be there with them, offer him a deal right there on the spot. And the state attorney back then, Willie Megg, says, no, just go try and talk to him. And Isom was like, that was the biggest mistake ever. He's lawyered up. He left the office, Sigfredo did, lawyered up, and nothing happened. They were hoping to cut a deal with a prosecutor who had authority to do it right there and say, you got 5 minutes to decide. Here's your deal. Tell the truth now, or you're going to get the death penalty. And they believe firmly that case would have changed directions. They could have possibly used him to make a proactive phone call, do some covert stuff that was not done.
Carl, forgive me in advance if I asked you this question like 20 minutes ago because I'm losing my mind. But why do you think this crime happened in 2014? Did I ask you this, why it's taken this long to get the first Adelson in that potentially in the witness chair, although he's probably not going to testify. But why so long to get him to trial?
Yeah, I mean, part of that, I mean, if it's a murder case, there's a lot more ramp up time. Like, I don't believe Charlie's case is really going to happen this spring. So there's going to be probably several continuances. Tim, this is a better question for Tim, I would say. But I mean, part of it also is there was a lot of data to collect, a lot of, I think there was like 570,000 pages of information, plus I can't remember how many hours of audio tape or wiretap recordings as well. So meant your lawyer calculate how many hours there would be just to listen to all that. So, so if the lawyers have to have that time to prepare as well, imagine, law enforcement has to put it together. So that automatically is going to build in a lot of time, right? So, but if I could comment on this one question here, because I actually thought about this the last couple of days involving the bump when they asked when Charlie asked, does it involve Wendi? And Donna right away goes, no. Well, and this person saying they think it's a lack of involvement of Wendi. And I'm actually the complete opposite. My mindset is thinking she was so much trying to talk in code and not make it think it has to do with anything up north, because that's what the newspaper article had to do with the Dan's killing in Tallahassee. So she was trying to talk in code and definitely get him off that subject. And that's why she was desperately not want to go there. If Wendi had not been involved, she was going, no, not Wendi. It's, and just moved on. So I think the fact she said no like 6 times or whatever it was, I think it shows her desperate efforts to get Wendi off the topic because she knows Wendi is on the topic.
Interesting.
And it feeds into my other points as well. So that to me is a data point indicating, it's not as strong a one as many of the others, but I think the fact that she said no multiple times showed she was really worried about Charlie starting to bug her for more questions. Of like, well, why wouldn't it be about Wendi or something like that? So I think the mom was definitely more, I think, sophisticated in handling the bump than Charlie was, because I heard some video where Donna's actually talking down to the bump agent. I mean, she's basically threatening him, and I'm like, wow, this woman's really, giving it to him, saying we are involved in this thing and we're not going to pay up, and we're going to report you. And of course they weren't going to report. That was all puffery, but I thought it was very I think it just shows what a very controlling and aggressive person that Donna can be, and decisive on getting her way. Because she was really freaking out about it.
Yeah. Shout out to Kathy, who's watching us in Ireland. It must be the middle of the night there, but hello, Kathy. So Tim, to you, Circuit Judge Robert Wheeler, aka your little fraternity brother, scheduled opening arguments to begin April 28th, jury selection on the 24th, evidence set to be heard May 1st. Carl just said he thinks there's going to be a few continuances. Do you think this trial starts? The judge better than anyone. Does it start on time or does it get delayed?
It's not the judge. You got a murder trial, first-degree murder trial. You got lawyers in Miami who can't get access to their client. One of the pitfalls of not having lawyers here, they can't get to him to go over and interview him because lack of mobility and travel. If they come to the judge and say, Judge, we got this problem. We just got this new evidence. We just got this proffer. Now we need to investigate this. This was just turned over. Mm-hmm. 9 months is almost unheard of a first-degree murder trial of this nature. You're usually talking 2 years, 2 to 3 years before these things get to trial. So it's not because of the judge. It's going to be because of the lawyers are going to come up with something, some reason, and then maybe the state maybe failed to do something, or something got turned over, or a witness is not available, or things happen. They always do. But to say it's going to try in 9 months a first-degree murder of this nature, I'd bet against it.
Thank you, baby doll. Saw your comment. I appreciate it. SL writes, the Leon County Jail looks horrible. Researched it online. I'm sure it looks worse in person. William Powers is a friend of the show and a very smart human being. He writes here, and we're going to go about another 5 minutes, everyone, because my mother is going to start to yell and curse if I don't get her home so she can get a proper night's sleep. But William Powers writes, Charlie's daily telephone contact, perhaps 30 minutes, is Donna. Donna wouldn't agree to involving Wendi, but you don't buy that, Carl.
No.
Nope. I love it, but
because there's too many. If you go over the evidence indicates Wendi was help plan this. So that's how I would prove that Wendi was involved in the planning aspect. And like I said, we only have to show one element of planning. There's multiple things she did. Like one of the other things, I'll just throw this in there. I can't remember the source, but number 3 is Wendi brought up the subject of death like 2 days before the 3 and 4-year-old boys were found out their dad was murdered. Right? I mean, it's like, what are the odds of that happening?
Angela writes here, Wendi on the stand for 2 days won't survive. Caught in lies, easily impeachable. Tim, again, no one knows Tallahassee better than you. Does Georgia just pick her apart if she's on that stand again?
Well, you saw Georgia did not cross-examine Magbanua. She let Sarah Dugan do it. Mm-hmm. I don't know if they were thinking down the road, we don't want to muddy her up so much that we can never use her. But I can see Georgia plotting that way. She's big picture, long run. Georgia's she's very methodical. She's cool and calm under pressure, doesn't show her cards, doesn't get ruffled. It's not emotional to her. I mean, it is because she wants a murderer to go to jail, but not that she's not going to be able to do her job. And she could viciously attack Wendi. And if Wendi tries to get up there and act like she did when she testified, being cute and clever and these answers that are not really, the juror's not going to buy it. Maybe when you're a witness, but not when you're a defendant. They look at you differently, and it's not going to work. And she may be her own worst witness.
Mm-hmm. Lilibeth Vieja writes, Carm is royalty. Carm is loving this.
I love it because there is a heart in the end.
I love it.
The statement. And I really miss this. I did it for 2 years during COVID.
I just made the decision now.
I love everybody. I like to listen and I like to butt in. That's my life, what I like to do.
Depending on how our numbers are, Carmela, because it's all about the almighty number. If you prove yourself tonight, Carm, you'll be here live every Sunday night. How about that? But I won't have an answer for you until I see this. The Skeeter girl says Carm with heart emojis. And then another couple comments, and we will wrap it with final thoughts. Brown and Beachy writes, Wendi set the fire, then went across the street to watch the whole thing burn down. That's one opinion. But then you get Art King of Whole Foods. You have to be able to prove it. I mean, Carl, you seem to think that you could prove it, but is the circumstantial evidence enough to get a conviction?
Sure. How do you prosecute cases where you try to prove somebody was murdered? You can't even prove that they're dead with a body, right?
Well, that's going on in Boston right now. We were covering that Brian Walsh story, who just incinerated his wife, according to authorities, and there's no body, but everything points in his direction. So you think it is possible to get a conviction with those, just the points that you have, which you say will build up to 50 points against Wendi Adelson, or I should say, in favor of an indictment for Wendi Adelson, but you think that's enough to, in your opinion, to get her convicted? Right.
I mean, as a prosecutor, who cares? You can get an indictment, like Tim was saying. I mean, anything can get indicted. What you want to do is make sure you got, the evidence that's going to stick with a jury, and a jury's going to believe that you're telling them the straight story on what happened, and is proof beyond a reasonable doubt. So that's a high standard. And what you want to do is make sure the jury feels comfortable as you are, that they're doing the right decision if they convict.
I'm reading this comment for the first time. DocuMax writes, when you think about it, this case wouldn't be the case it is for us without it all having gone on so long. And yes, as well as it all being as crude and obvious, the hit, idea, perpetrators, motive. Tim, do you agree? I'm curious from your perspective, what is your interest in this case, and why do you think there is so much intrigue in this story?
Well, obviously, I know a lot of the players. The street, I've been on the street. I know where Marco's house was. I drove by it after it to see if anybody could commit the crime. There's no parking on that street, by the way. He would have had to have pulled into the driveway to get out and commit the crime because it's just two car lanes. And it's a hit. You got everything in there. You got law professors, you got kids, you got hired hitmen, you got idiot hired hitmen, you got the FBI figuring out how they found them, and then you got who's going to flip. Is Sigfredo? Are the parents pulling the strings? Can we get the people who are behind this thing? So there's interest. And it was a young man that was killed, a professor, obviously doing nothing wrong, and killed for a divorce case, basically. And it's gone on, and everybody wants to see the puzzle come together. They're pieces, they're not all dim. Everybody wants to see it so they can feel good that the people who did this are punished.
And Tim, right back at you with Yannette Gomez. This will be the last comment of the night, and then we'll get some closing thoughts. Whatever happened to Sigfredo's jail calls that were sealed during Katie's trial? And if Tim doesn't know the answer to this, Fancy will, so you can reach out to her. But Tim?
I do not know about those jail calls being sealed. I don't know what happened to them. I would think unless there were calls that had lawyers' conversations, that would be privileged material, and that privilege doesn't go away with a conviction. Sigfredo, I don't think he's waived privilege. So.
And look who is here. John of Mice and Men Steinbeck has appeared. Hey, y'all. Since he can't speak, Carl, tell us the name of your brother's podcast and where you can find it and what's it about.
Brainwashing Children, and it has to do with all the types of abuse that happens with children when a parent does the damage to the kids by poisoning the mind of the child of the other parent, telling them the other parent's bad, and then they try to alienate the parent. So that's where they come up with the term parental alienation. And like I say, this one had to do with parental extermination. And so this one was something he had not covered before. And so that piqued his interest. And that's why he highlighted this case. So because it happens a lot all around the United States. And I know he's even been on Prager University channel talking about it as well. So it's just a lot of things in the courts as well. They're not aware of this type of abuse of children. And so he's trying to get the message out there to anybody that will listen, like, look, this is a real problem, and judges, juries, and attorneys need to be aware of this and help shut it down. If we just don't know about it and don't try to know about it, then the abuse can continue and proliferate.
Brainwashing Children, a podcast by John Steinbeck. It takes on a different meaning in my family where brainwashing children do that to me, and I end up giving them Coke and endless amounts of video games because they torture me into it.
But I think that Ruth Markel,
yes,
who I'm sure is interested in tonight's program,
yes, and she will see it,
and she will see it. People will let her know that we spoke about the
Markel
case,
Act,
and she will want to hear. She would like to see
John's podcast. Great, yeah. So as we all know, Ruth helped get the Markel Act passed. Helped get the Markel Act passed in the state of Florida, which has to do with grandparent alienation, a cause that is very close to her heart. And John, we can talk with Carl offline and maybe get Ruth on John's program about that. He is Lieutenant Colonel retired. Carm, I am not yet retired. I'm working on Sunday nights with you. You're not retired either. He's a nearly 30-year judge advocate for the U.S. Army, Judge Advocate General Corps and combat veteran. Now he has his own law firm, aptly named the Steinbeck Law Firm. Carl,
where are they located?
Where are you located? Somewhere in Texas.
Yeah, in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, McKinney, Texas. Right north of Dallas.
Stay out of trouble in Dallas. But if you get into it, Carm, you call Carl. Carl, so you don't think this trial is going to get going in April? what should we look for next before this trial starts? Do you think we could see a pair of indictments? Any chance?
I think there's always that chance. I mean, there's been plenty of, I think there's enough evidence right now to go on, but it's all prosecutor preference and how comfortable they feel going forward with more of the circumstantial evidence, as Dan mentioned. But if they have information from Katie that's, somewhat beneficial, then that might help move it up quicker. But we just don't know. And so I would say that if they are going to do it, I would think they'd probably indict them by the end of the year. That's just from my experience. That's what I'm picking up on. I don't know if Tim would agree with that or not.
Yeah, the man who drove back from Atlanta and still appeared on our program while John Singer was too busy watching football. We obviously appreciate Tim Jansen greatly. He is the famed Tallahassee defense attorney who is a partner and owner in the firm Jansen and Davis in Tallahassee in the great state of Florida. Also, he spent 5 years as a federal prosecutor, and who I am turning into the next Alec Baldwin minus the shooting, just the star, the A-list celebrity appeal. Tim, what's next for this case? Are we going to get some kind of shocking, as they say in news, development before Charlie's trial starts?
I don't believe so. I don't think Georgia is going to do that. I do want to say, Carl, thanks for your service to this country. I know a lot of lawyers that do that and they get a lot of experience, but they're serving their country too. But no, I don't believe that you're going to see a shocking. I think they're prepping for Adelson. I don't believe Magbanua is going to give them what they need, because I believe if she really had something to give them, her lawyer wouldn't have said you're so innocent. Her lawyer would have had more control over her client. She would have convinced her to give that evidence early on. And I don't think they're going to use her to the degree that we're hoping or thinking. I think there might be circumstantial evidence for Wendi. I don't think they're going to go out of the limb and indict Wendi unless they have enough they feel comfortable with. So you can charge someone, whether you can convict them. That you got jurors on there. What are the jurors going to do? And you really don't know. The 12 people on the jury, the ones that don't know anything to get on the jury, are the ones that are on there for a reason. So I don't see them going out on a limb. I'm not saying it couldn't happen within a year to the end of the year, because we're only in January. A lot could happen. But I don't think Georgia or Jack are going to jump up and indict Wendi and Donna before Adelson's trial in April. I don't think so.
And I just want to give a quick shout out to the man who makes it all happen. The reason we do have the best guests in all of true crime is one Stephen Cohen, who books guys like Tim Jansen and Carl Steinbeck for us. So big shout out to Steve-O for that. Quick programming note. Tomorrow morning, we're going to drop our special episode. I had the honor and privilege to interview Dr. Henry Lee. He is the preeminent forensic scientist in the world, did the JFK assassination review, the O.J. Simpson trial, JonBenet Ramsey, Phil Spector, the list goes on. He also talked about the Idaho case. So that episode will drop in the morning, and then we'll be back with a live, or I should say another episode, not live, on the Murdaugh trial, which we are covering as well out of South Carolina. Tim has been helping us with that greatly. So appreciate everyone tuning in tonight. Keep an eye out for what we have coming up next with the Murdaugh trial and more. Thank you to Carl and your brother, John. Love you.
Thank you,
America. And thanks of all to my lovely mom, Carmel.
Thanks, Carl. Nice meeting you.
Yeah.
Thanks, Tim.
Thanks
Nice meeting you.
for all your kind words, who wrote kind words to me.
Amen.
Bye, Joel.